David Ehrenfeld famously said that nature is not only more complex than we think, it's more complex than we can think. It would not be possible for us to fully comprehend the complexity of a forest, or for that matter, a body. And I'm saying this in response to a prompt of, this is your brain on complexity overload. And I think that we can have multiple responses to complexity overload. I think that the healthiest, most appropriate response to the complexity overload of being in wild nature is awe and a sense of the divine. I believe that this is one of the places where the impulse for religion arose, is in response to, I mean, of course, if you are confronted with something that is more complex than you, that is literally unimaginably, unthinkably complex, then what you are going to do, the appropriate response, is to perceive that as a mystery. And mystery is the starting point of healthy religion, an awe at this mystery, and a recognition, a humility in the face of this mystery, that we are small and it is large, and we are one small part of something that we cannot even imagine the connections between all the parts. That's one response to complexity overload, is a sense of awe, respect, and humility. If one is insecure, one can respond to this complexity by attempting to simplify it, which is one of the things that this culture has been doing from the beginning, is destroying forests and turning them into cities. That's a much less complex community, a much less complex biome. A parking lot is much less complex than a meadow. And this has been one of the things that this culture has been doing for the last 6,000 to 10,000 years, is simplifying complexity. So part of the response of this culture to complexity overload has been to attempt to simplify it. I believe, in many ways, out of fear of this complexity, and also a fear of the awe that you feel toward this complexity, and out of a sense of insecurity that causes you to, narcissism, we tend to think of narcissists as being really ego-driven and having really sort of strong senses of self, but it's really the opposite, that they have a very weak sense of self, which is why it needs to be reinforced constantly. And that's why everything has to come back to them, is because they need to be constantly fed. As R.D. Laing said, how do you plug a void plugging a void? They've got a huge void inside, which they attempt to plug by having people praise them, by shutting anybody down who might disagree, et cetera, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons that, a person with an inferiority complex running up against, that turns into narcissism, running up against incomprehensible complexity and getting complexity overload, their response would be to be afraid of that awe and to attempt to destroy the complexity so that they will no longer feel that fear and inferiority. And then I want to bring up a different sort of complexity overload too, which is, I know that I know that there are times when I am faced with a very complex series of tasks where I can feel a complete overload and I just shut down. And then what I have to do is I have to break it down and take it piece by piece. So I think, how does one, if one is feeling overwhelmed negatively by the complexity, how does one stop that? And I think, as with so many things, the first step toward a proper action, a proper course of action, is to do a diagnosis and to recognize that if one is uh, overwhelmed and feels inferior because of this complexity of a wild place, that the problem is not with the wild place, the problem is with you. And that what needs to change is not the wild place, but your attitude. And this is where I love the word remember, because remember can mean to recollect something, which also recollect, but it also means to remember, to become a member once again. And the solution to the complexity overload of wild nature is to remember that we are ourselves an infinitely complex part of that infinitely complex community, and to fall into it and to remember, over the past couple hundred years, especially since the Enlightenment, religion has gotten a really bad name. And yeah, religions have done many, many bad things to encourage having a bad name. There's the choice of Christianity or death. There's the Crusades. There's the Inquisition. There's all sorts of terrible, terrible things, the witch trials. And we shouldn't allow the horrible things that have been done in the name of especially patriarchal religion to sour us on that basic impulse of awe, humility, respect as an appropriate response to what is a beautiful and truly awe-inspiring overload of complexity.